Welcome to Ed's Not Dead. I'm Robbie Dodd. I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. C.H. Siddons.
Hey, what's up?
Great to see you, man. Welcome back. And, of course, Mr. Peter Crable. Hey, Mr. Crable.
Howdy. It's too bad we're not doing this in person.
I know. This was going to be the episode where we reunited after...
Over a year.
It's probably been 14 months.
Probably, yeah. It was probably like February.
It's been a while.
I missed the subs and the pizza in the kitchen, and then coming down to the Dodd man cave to record.
Good times.
We'll get back to it.
We will.
All right. Well, it's great to see you, fellas. Welcome back to the show, everyone. We're glad you're with us. As always, you can find us at Ed's Not Dead PC on Twitter and check out the website edsnotdead.com. We have a fabulous show tonight. We are going to interview Robert Pondiscio, who's a senior fellow at the Fordham Institute, and we are going to talk to him about his recent piece in Mr. Crable's favorite conservative rag, Education. Education. Well, we always Education Next pieces always show up in the show notes.
They do. They do.
And they're good.
For good fodder.
They're fun to talk about.
They are.
We're going to talk to Mr. Pondiscio about the science of reading and
legislating good teaching by law. Yeah,
legislating good teaching and pre-K reading instruction by law, which has been tried a bunch over the years. So we'll get his take on whether it's worth it. We had an exciting announcement tonight. We are going to be a press partner. Isn't that true, Mr. Siddons?
That's right. We're a media partner with the World Innovation Summit for Education. It's based in Qatar, also known as WISE. The Qatar Foundation linked up with us, and they had an event just a few days ago that we are the media partner on. So we're going to get some guests on that were part of that summit from the recent conference. And we're hopefully going to continue with partnering with them in the coming weeks and months with other events that they're doing.
I like Wise Education's global interest in education innovation.
Yes,
and
spoke to me.
And we're going to be delving into their work on learning ecosystems, right?
Yes,
I'm incredibly tempted to put Mr. Crable on the spot right now and ask him what a learning ecosystem is, but I'll refrain.
It's basically what I've garnered from my research is it's basically just trying to rethink how education is the center of our communities and our cities and the ways in which we're improving our societies.
All right. Well said.
What I was going to say.
Exactly. Mr. Siddons, that was the fakest laugh ever.
What do you mean?
Ha-ha.
Ha-ha. Ha-ha, you win.
Well, thank you to the Wise Education. We are excited to be their press partner, and you'll be sending out some. I think you already have sent out some missives on Twitter about our partnership, haven't you?
Yes, there have been a few.
All right. And then any last updates on the most awesome pod spinoff of all time, the Pandemic Pass?
So the last interview was with Zaretta Hammond. If you didn't get a chance to listen,
I listened, and your special co-host,
my special co-host Serenity Moore, my very good friend Serenity Moore, and she posted it on her Facebook profile, so it gained a lot of traction there as well because she has probably double the amount of followers that we have, maybe, or that I have on Facebook, I'm sure. And there was a lot of good feedback about the interview and about some of the content about how do we flip the deficit mindset of what our students and our children have experienced this past year. There's a lot of folks that are wringing their hands about learning loss and all this other things, and they're forgetting the fact that, Robbie, I think you said it well, early on in the pandemic, that kids are always learning. And, although this is a setback in some ways, we are going to come out of this in a much stronger way and a much more flexible way for kids. And it was a great conversation revolving around that.
She's always so inflappable. You know what I mean?
She is.
Global pandemic, we got this.
Right.
Yeah.
Other huge problems, we can handle it. Don't worry.
Mm-hmm.
Good job, Mr. Siddons. I think Mr. Crable's incredibly bitter that you got a significant amount of show feedback on Pandemic Pass. I think Ed's Not Dead pales in comparison lately in the show feedback.
It's not a contest, Robbie.
It
okay.
is. Well,
it always is.
You had a great run. We'll have to see if there's a new iteration of Pandemic Pass. What'll be the next next life? We'll have to see, right?
We'll have to see.
Yep.
Casey and I are actually talking about a spin-off podcast.
Without me, of course.
Yeah, without you. It's called
Shocker.
It's called The 80s as Remembered by Us.
Oh, that's really good. Since my 80s segment went over so well.
We're going to watch reruns of VH1 I Love the 80s and then comment on it as if we were there.
That would be pretty funny.
We'll talk to luminaries from the 80s and get their memories on the 80s. If only we knew anybody.
You've got one on the show. Okay, that's enough insults. All right. As always, Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Ed's Not Dead Media, a podcast media company that, get this, curates high-quality audio stories across a variety of genres, like Pandemic Pass. All right, fellas, let's jump into our first piece this week. It's an article that I cannot find that I sent to you. Where is it? Is it in the show notes?
It's always in the show notes.
I have my.
It's in the chat.
It's in the chat.
In the chat.
I sent, and I was very impressed. Mr. Crable was. Sometimes you all are not that high on my my offerings.
Not true. We don't discuss your offerings.
But Mr. Crable liked this one. So social justice is now the fourth purpose of public schools, and all four are in conflict, by Samantha Hedges in Discourse. Just came out on April 21st, my wife's birthday. So Ms. Hedges puts forth that one of the main longtime troubling things about American public education is what they often refer to in the research as goal ambiguity. What is the purpose of American public education? Because it's such a diverse, multi-stakeholder kind of enterprise, and a local issue, a state issue, a national issue, the way schools are set up and policy and practice can really vary, and there's often no agreement about what the purpose of schooling is. So she lays out that there historically have been three. Okay, we're gonna have a little quiz here. Are you ready, Mr. Siddons? You're up first. So the first is social mobility. The social mobility purpose. What? Describe that, if you could, if you would.
About social mobility?
Yeah. What's that? What's that all about?
The way I understood it is that we're preparing students to be able to move between or move through classes based on their career choice or their college choice.
Get rich. Right. So that is is it a private good or a public good? Runs counter to what you espouse. It's a private good.
Right.
So it's all about the individual and how education
what you can do at the expense of others.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. And I only say that to you, Casey, because I know you feel strongly that education is a public good.
Right.
So let's move on to social efficiency. Mr. Crable, describe social efficiency.
Training workers.
The
creating workers in schools.
The Chamber of Commerce, right? Yep. That the private sector and business, a nation at risk. We've got to create a workforce that is modern, and it's all about economics. So that's why we teach. That's why students
build workers.
But a public good, but only in the sense of economic safety.
GDP.
Yeah, GDP.
Yeah. Back in the 1920s, during the teens and the 20s, during maybe in a period of incredible immigration, I read one time that its purpose was to was to address the needs of the great unwashed, which is
God.
I know, isn't that just hideous?
That reminds me of the Tayek and Cuban book.
Yeah, in fact, I think I stole that line from Tayek and Cuban. Yep. So that has been a long time supposed goal of public education. And the last, democratic equality. I don't have to take a stab at one of these. At this one, who wants to summarize democratic equality? Because I know, Mr. Crable, you're interested in this.
Yeah. I mean, you create informed citizens to participate in the democratic process. And we've had Johan Nima on the show that has told us all about this and explained kind of the history of the creation of the common school.
Right. And does it apply also to equality of outcomes? And that our goal is to produce equality of outcomes?
Yes, relative equality.
Relative equality.
Yeah.
How about inputs? No. Equal inputs will produce equal outputs.
Equal inputs should produce relatively equal outputs.
Okay. That was good.
Yeah.
And an example of that would be potentially, as far as legislation is concerned, is No Child Left Behind.
Right.
So we're trying to our purpose is to make sure that we get equal outputs in education and that kids are achieving it at equal levels. And then the last, social justice.
The new one.
This is the new one, and this is the big one. And this is the one that seems to be upsetting the apple cart. And it is based on the other big E word, which is equity, right? So unequal inputs and putting education in the context of equity and anti-racism and addressing inherent systemic structural barriers that have kept certain groups of kids and communities from achieving equality of outcomes. So that is the conceit of this, that those four are in conflict. And until we decide which one rules the day, we're not gonna be able to improve our schools or get to where we need to go as a nation. Did I miss anything in Ms. Hedges' piece?
No.
So the question is, where are you? Well, let's start with this. Which is as an educator, which one do you espouse of the four?
You're stealing my question. I asked you that last night.
I know, and
totally hedged on it.
I didn't. I just did a creative combination.
I think my initial, the one that I was drawn to was democratic equality. That was like the one that jumped out at me first. And when I asked you the question last night, I was like, gun to your head, pick one. It can only be one. That was kind of what I was going for. But democratic equality is an ideal and an idea, but that comes up with the reality of the real world pretty harshly and pretty starkly, where in reality, equal inputs don't produce equal outcomes because equal inputs don't take into account any of the other myriad of factors that might impact student lives, that might impact student achievement, where they live, their environment, who they're surrounded by. I mean, there's a billion factors. So I think the thing that I liked most about this article was how it labeled the 3 and now 4 purposes of public education. Because I'm sure you guys get this all the time. Parents, people, I'm thinking about moving. Is this school good? Is that school good? And I'm always like, well, what do you want out of school? It depends. Right. And I think for me, I'm like, this is, without me knowing it, this is really what I was asking them. What's most important to you? Are you all about social mobility? Well, then your school is going to be one thing. You're going to want the richest school with the richest people. It's going to get you connections to the other rich people that is going to get you a job.
Right.
And then, on down the line. So, I don't know. But then as I thought a little bit more, and then I'll let you go, Casey, because I'm going to do the dot hedge. I was like, well, if you did any, because I was like, well, is conflict bad? is the inherent conflict amongst these bad? And initially I was sort of like, yeah, you'll never do anything well if you're only like 25% in any one of these. But, I think if you were to take any of these to the extreme, I'm not sure that you would like the outcomes of school either. If schools were strictly about focus on training workers, then we're stifling innovation. If we're only looking at democratic equality, then everybody gets $1, and regardless of their circumstances. So I think, in retrospect, it is. I think the argument that they're in conflict and that's a bad thing is not necessarily the case.
They're in conflict, and that's what makes us the United States.
Yeah, essentially.
I mean, because are we ever going to get our populace to agree on what the purpose of education is for their child?
Never.
So, in a way, I mean, I think it's really interesting historically to kind of to describe these purposes and how they're different and how they may conflict. But I'm not sure the idea of at the end, which is a bit half-hearted, that we're going to somehow land on just one. Mr. Sids, what's your take?
I'm very much in the camp of the democratic equality as a social studies teacher, I think back to teaching the purposes of government to 11-year-olds, 6th graders, and you go into what's the purpose of government, and we're talking about what should the government, like at its very core, what should our governments be providing for, and it's to provide for the common good. And some of the things that 11-year-olds will come up with and agree with is taking care of its citizens. Are we providing healthcare? Are we supporting the most destitute around us? Are we building in foundations in our society to really the rising tide lifts all boats kind of theory? And 11-year-olds, by and large, they come up with these things. They don't. I'm not feeding it to them when I'm teaching it them. They're coming up with them. So I bring it up because, in that sense, that democratic equality piece, I always saw it. At the time, I didn't see it, but now I do in hindsight, which is, and maybe I should have been teaching more from the social justice aspect. But I feel like that if we're molding kids or if we're molding students to be critical thinkers and effective citizens in our society, then hopefully, I guess in my head, they would be more apt to be more than just not that a blue collar job is bad, but more than just an assembly line worker, and that they would be able to compete for higher social positions because, ideally they'd be able to reach higher levels, go to college. I'm not really sure. I guess I'm not sure how to tie that up for the final comment.
But isn't the notion of democratic equality a lie? I mean, it hasn't. I mean,
that's a good point. Like
until 1955, it didn't even exist for African American kids.
And I thank you for mentioning that, because one of the things that you teach or that I taught was governments promote the rule of law. We talk about the rule of law, and I left to be a teacher coach from the classroom right when Trump was taking office, right? So I always thought about, how do you teach promoting the rule of law to 6th graders in an era of an administration that really, but from all even neutral accounts, did not have respect for the rule of law? How do you teach that to kids when there's someone in the highest office of the land that is treating people of color and immigrants coming to this country, refugees, in a way that they did? And that, I think that in that sense, there are many ways to leverage that kind of teaching into a way that's like, well, we are not inherently equal in this country, and you can see it on the news every day.
And as I read through this a little bit more, and then I read the paragraph about democratic equality, to the end of the paragraph, it talks about implementing a classical curriculum.
Yeah.
And so I think as I was thinking about it, was much more like civics minded, to like understand the actual elements of government and the 3 branches and how
I had
that
civics
works.
in 8th grade. Yeah.
Yeah, as opposed to like a quote unquote American culture, which I think maybe this is actually talking a little bit more
Oh,
about.
it is. I mean, it was.
Yeah, and I misread
think.
that.
Well, I think civics evolved as just it was a part of the evolution of this concept of democratic equality as far as a purpose of education. But I think there's an interesting statement in that says it was really to produce. The initial idea was to produce citizens,
Right.
and learning was actually something that evolved later. Schools' purpose was to socialize kids in our democratic ideals,
Right.
not really to learn.
Yeah. Assimilate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want your help on this one concept though, because I've been struggling with it. And then we'll tie it up. Is here comes the social justice warriors. The social justice approach calls for an unequal distribution, which that annoys me that it's phrased as an unequal distribution.
As if something's being taken away from someone else.
Correct. Of resources to achieve equal outcomes, regardless of how those outcomes are defined. In contrast, democratic equality calls for equal treatment of students in the process of schooling, which is relative to equal treatment under the law, such as by the use of a uniform school curriculum. I feel like that paints with a very broad brush. How equal are the inputs in schooling right now? I mean, equity already exists. It has for a long time. Equity exists in the law. For example, Public Law 94-142, which was for students with disabilities, 1972. That called for unequal distribution of resources, right? Kids that had special needs needed different services. Mm-hmm. And so equity has been around, and I don't see those two things in conflict. That's why I hedged last night, Peter. Yeah. Now there's an argument to be had about how well equity works, how well it has worked
on the ground.
Correct, on the ground, but as a concept, it's been in place for a long time.
I think there's a discussion to be had. I think if I'm reading in between the lines here, the complaint would be, what are the outcomes? Okay, cool. Let's give unequal money. Right. How do we know whether it works or not? You know what I mean? But yes, the concept of unequal inputs, well, it's not entirely true because people of means already have way more, aside from just monetary numbers in their wallet, in
their bank accounts.
Yeah, there's 75,000 other advantages that you have.
Yeah.
Being a person of means is a person that doesn't.
Well, and they make an assumption.
The inputs are already unequal for them.
Yeah, it's completely
correct.
And they make an assertion that, for example, San Diego voted to overhaul its grading system. Only because non-white students were achieving at lower levels than white students. But if you look at, did they look at the data as to say, like, why are some students performing differently than others? It paints, as you're saying, it paints a broad brush about what exactly is being changed in the school system to reflect a more equitable outcomes for kids.
Yep. Critics of the social justice approach point out that social justice does not achieve an objective of public schools to raise academic achievement as measured by test scores. But this assertion is difficult to evaluate until there's a consensus about which purpose of public schools should be the primary one. Yeah, I mean, we've had a million arguments, and Crable, you summarized it very nicely at the beginning of our discussion. Is your take on what you want your kids to get from school could be very different than mine.
Right.
So I thought it was a fascinating piece. Check it out. It is social justice is now the fourth purpose of public schools, and all four are in conflict, by Sarah Hedges, April 21st, in Discourse. You gonna push this out?
Yes.
Okay.
If I may also say, like, if obviously this is bashing on social justice a little bit, but if schools' purpose is moving into more social justice, wouldn't you be able to hit the three initial purposes in a more positive way, or in a way that lifts people up?
Right. Instead of throwing people into poverty and not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
allowing people to choose jobs because they have access to healthcare, getting people to understand that our democracy is not really a democracy and is not really equal is probably a good way to be teaching about our country.
Absolutely. And we've spent 100 years teaching a lie about democratic equality.
Right.
Sorry, maybe it's time to start to teach about the inequality that the country was founded on.
Right.
And then start to show kids
and strive for equality.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So, all right. I'm feeling relieved that neither of you asked me, now that I'm putting myself on the spot, where I stood on this. I'm all in.
Where do you stand on it?
I'm all in on social justice.
We know that.
All right. Folks, don't go away. When we come back, we are excited to welcome Fordham Fellow Robert Pandisio onto Ed's Not Dead. We are going to talk about K-3 reading, right, Mr.
Whoa.
Right, Mr. Sittons?
So exciting!
You guys should be interviewing me on this.
That's why I'm glad to bring him on, because I knew that you put coals to the fire, or whatever that analogy is.
All right.
Put his feet to the fire and rake him over the coal. And there's no I in team.
There was a Crable child in there. Totally distracted us.
They're pre-bedtime.
So saying goodnight. All right, folks, don't go away. We are Ed's Not Dead. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Ed's Not Dead. We are still here. Hey, fellas.
Howdy.
All right. We are incredibly excited to have Robert Pandisio, who is a senior fellow at the Fordham Institute, on the show. He writes extensively about education. And as we've talked before the show, he was a teacher. And so he has, as I like to say, been in the vineyard and picked the grapes. So he knows what he's talking about. He's not just one of those policy people, right, Robert? Welcome to Ed's Not Dead.
Thanks for having me, gentlemen. And yeah, I was saying before, I don't like to be the guy who waves the bloody shirt, but there are a lot of people in the policy world who are just, shall we say, incurious.
Yeah, that's right. All right. So you had a piece that really got us thinking, can teaching be improved by law? It was in Education Next. I think it came out in, was it this month? Was it April or March?
It was last week. Yeah.
It was last week. Okay. And it's really focused on the science of reading. Admittedly, in the piece, you talk about your, being somewhat scared about the impact of policy on what happens in the classroom in just general terms. But the science of reading is something that, as far as policy is concerned, or law, you have some hope. Before we dive into that, for our listeners, can you just summarize science of reading? What are we talking about?
Yeah, sure. It defies easy summarization. And I should talk maybe a little bit about, what led me into this work, because I was, a fifth grade teacher at a struggling South Bronx elementary school for several years, about, 15 years ago or so. It was a struggle for the kids to read. So I first became interested in the science of reading, although we didn't call it then. I mean, this is kind of a new phrase that's gained some traction, mostly due to the work of Emily Hanford of American Public Media, who's written a lot and broadcast a lot about the so-called science of reading. So it's not a phrase that we have been using until recently. But my kind of interest in scientifically based reading pedagogy, if you like, was a direct result of my teaching in the South Bronx. So just to paint the picture for you a little bit, I taught a PS 277, which, if you know New York City, and why would you? District 7 is the lowest scoring school district in New York City. My school was the lowest scoring school in District 7. So it was, by definition, the lowest of the low in terms of its reading scores, fewer than 1 out of 5 kids reading at or above grade level. And I fell in love, I guess you would say. I developed my kind of an intellectual crush on the work of E.D. Hirsch Jr.
Oh, geez, I knew he was going to be an E.D. Hirsch guy.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I mean,
Okay.
but it's because my eyes are open, frankly. In other words, my kid, in 5 years teaching fifth grade in the school, I literally had never had a kid who could not, quote, read, or to use a word I didn't use at the time, decode. They could all decode. They struggled for comprehension. And Hirsch was the one guy whose work described exactly what I saw in my South Bronx classroom. Kids who the old phenomenon you've heard 1,000 times of, I read it, but I didn't get it. Well, why didn't you get it? They didn't get it because they didn't have the background knowledge sufficient to help them, make the intuitive leaps that mature readers make. So, that was kind of my first journey down this road. I mean, I left my classroom determined, almost literally, found my way to Charlottesville, Virginia, to knock on Hirsch's door to say, hey, let me help you because you're the guy who's kind of figured it out. Because long story short this was not taken seriously in New York City at the time, and maybe not still. So I just, every kid I've ever taught has been a low-income kid of color. And as far as I was concerned then and now, this was what they needed. So, the science of reading covers a lot of ground. That's the piece that I've specialized in over the years, is that background knowledge piece, that knowledge-rich curriculum piece. I alluded to Emily Hanford. The broadcasting and writing that she's done more recently tends to focus on the early childhood ed part of it, the decoding, the phonological awareness, the fluency, etc. And she did a remarkable piece a few years ago called Hard Words. And it really kind of laid out the case that, look, we know how to teach kids how to read, and we don't, by and large. And it's because there are other more fashionable ideas about how to teach reading. But this so-called science of reading has really been quite well known to a number of researchers for decades. And she has probably done as much as anybody to kind of get schools and districts and states to sit up and take notice and say, hey, why aren't we doing that? What I call the when Harry met Sally theory of reading. You look at what works and say, I'll have what they're having. Right. So hopefully this is gaining a little bit of traction. But to bring the story, up to date, it's now getting to the point where you've got 20 odd states that are considering some form of legislation to basically mandate that schools do some form of this in their states, and that's where this gets complicated.
And now that you mentioned the 20 states that are considering these measures, how do you perceive this is going to impact public school systems in the near term?
Yeah, unknown and unknowable. And I mean, you pointed out that I'm kind of guardedly optimistic about this. Because, since we're all educators here, there's no reason not to be, frank about this. The track record of policy driving classroom instruction is not good. You will recall that it was the law of the land that every kid would read on grade level by 2014 under No Child Left Behind.
Did we not make that?
It happened. I thought it happened in my school.
Okay.
I
remember seeing T-shirts at one point.
Equality of outcomes.
Yeah, we did it. And I don't want to be cavalier about this, because I'm not one of these people who says that policymakers should just leave teachers the heck alone.
Right.
Because because let's be brutally frank, if we knew how to do this, we'd be doing it. And in any kind of public accountability system or any publicly financed system, there's just going to be some kind of accountability. It's just naive to think there can't or won't or shouldn't be. So if your wish is, well, just get the policymakers out of it, well, that's not going to happen. What comes next? So what comes next is things like these various laws, and the one I wrote about a few weeks ago was in North Carolina. But more commonly, Florida, going back 20 years ago, Ohio has this. A lot of states have these so-called third grade reading guarantees. That if a kid isn't reading on grade level, they get retained. They get all these interventions or whatnot. It differs from state to state. But there has been
which you'll agree was a total disaster in Florida.
Well, it depends. I think it worked out okay in Florida, but and there's good reason to think it's working out okay in Mississippi if you look at NAEP scores. But it's the larger point is it's not simply this kind of wave the magic wand and by right. Magic fiat. We have now made it the law that kids will read by third grade. I mean, I make this point all the time in the policy world. that if you think about the kind of the internal logic of accountability measures, it makes an assumption, which is that schools and teachers know what to do and they merely need to be held accountable. And I always say, where did you get that idea from? Because, and I'm sure you've had experiences in your various schools throughout your careers where you encounter people who are, as I like to say, trying hard and failing. And they're not trying hard despite their training. Often they're trying hard and failing because of their training. So, right. In other words, you can't, neither carrots nor sticks is sufficient here. I mean, there is, to be brutally frank, a gap in competence often in struggling schools that you can't just, say by law, you're now going to do your job well. If they knew how to do their job well, they'd be doing it.
Right.
So that's my next question. That was a great segue. So, and you talk a little bit about this in the piece, but having spent so much time teaching and learning about reading, in your view, how does codifying the science of reading into law and policy ensure that other critical elements of early childhood education, which I think you're really talking about the learning to read versus the reading to learn piece.
Yeah, I think that's right.
How do we ensure that the PD, the leadership development, certainly principals, leadership play a role in this in schools, and the fidelity of implementation, which is what you're talking about, which is so critical. That famous study that Rand did where 75% of initiatives are co-opted and not implemented with fidelity. How do we get those things under in any kind of law and policy?
Yeah, well, look, this is to the degree to which I'm guardedly optimistic about so-called science of reading laws, to coin a phrase. It's because of exactly what you just described. In other words, if a state, and the jury's out in terms of what a state can do at that kind of 35,000 foot level to drive good practice. I mean, remind me, we'll talk about the Louisiana model, which I like. But you can make a case, mind you, a theoretical case. I can't point to actual data in the real world for this. But you can make a theoretical case if, say, North Carolina says, or another state says, look, in this state, this is how we teach reading, okay? We are going to do, quote, phonics. We're going to, adopt a curriculum, adopt a program, adopt a theory of how kids learn how to read. Well, then you can kick in all those, or you can incentivize all those other measures. In other words, there's one fewer moving part. So, and if you think about the entire ecosystem of how teachers get trained, one kind of interesting data point that we never think about is the vast majority of teachers who teach in a given state go to ed school in that state.
Right.
I mean, on average, 80, 90%. So that gives you a certain amount of leverage as a policymaker to say, look, if you want to certify teachers in the state, you got to teach them how to do this, meaning the science of reading, meaning whatever the curriculum is. So you can kind of, you can see a way, if you squint, to create kind of an intellectual ecosystem where this is how you teach reading. We're going to train you how to teach reading. We're going to build your professional development around this, where it all vertically aligns, as opposed to, what I got when I was a new teacher, which is, oh, well, Mr. Pandisio, you're the best person to know what every child needs. I was like, are you out of your damn minds? I just got here. I'm the best person to know anything here. We do too much of that in education, where we just kind of, throw new teachers into the deep end of the pool and figure they're going to figure it out for themselves, which is just kind of.
Yeah, and I always joke with the guys. If you want to get a conservative excited, just say phonics. That's just there's a little bit
40 odd phonemes, and they are what they are, and you can teach them.
That's the piece that worries me, though, because as you've described so well, the context of teaching is such a complex, the environment that teachers work within. And then I'm curious about how issues of equity, the kind of the need to vary inputs depending on the school that you're in, how those factors are considered, because, sometimes some of these programmatic approaches can be one size fits all as it relates to reading. I have my own personal issues with really overly prescriptive reading programs. No Child Left Behind was full of those. Let's intervene with kids and let's just phonics them to death. Didn't matter the grade level they were in. So I have questions about the quality of programs, how states make those decisions, how policy is attached to that, because not all programs are created equal when it comes to good reading instruction.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And I mean, my one pushback on your pushback is to say, in terms of equity, I've made myself very unpopular in this work by saying, to my mind, literacy is equity. In other words, and I'm gonna, that's the hill I'm going to die on.
Okay.
So and I'm not going to be. And I think I said this in the piece. I don't have very much of a desire at all to impose. I have very strong feelings about good, better, and best in terms of curriculum, but I'm not willing to impose those on people. I'll try to persuade you, but maybe the one exception would be early childhood literacy. And I'm not going to say the P word and set you off. Coding, how about that? Because there are only so many letters and only so many phonemes, and they can be learned and practiced and mastered. So, for Pete's sake, can we please at least do that?
Oh no, I agree. We just have to, at some point, maybe in our next time you come on the show, we've got to talk comprehension, because that is that's
E.B. Hirsch. Yeah, I mean, right. that's I'm a Hirsch guy, is precisely because of comprehension, because I watched my fifth graders struggle for years,
right,
with comprehension. And again, Hirsch was the one guy who explained this. And whenever I would bring this up in my grad school classes and my PD, I would invariably hear some version of, "Oh, that's that dead white guy stuff. Nobody takes that seriously." Like, whoa, wait a minute, that's not what he's about at all. He's about reading comprehension. He's about background knowledge. He's about schema, etc. So, I mean. Again,
he's still alive.
He's alive, 90-something and sharp as a tack.
I know.
We almost had him on the show, didn't we?
I know. I was emailing with his secretary.
We couldn't get a date together.
Yeah, we couldn't get a date. Yeah.
I have a question. There's a dozen of those states in your article that you're talking about that are, considering these laws.
Oh, here we go.
No, a dozen of that list. It seems that, if you look at the rankings of however they do the rankings across the United States, a dozen or so of those states are pretty low on the rankings of education system.
Yeah.
What does it tell you about the particular states that are pursuing these laws, and if it proves to be positive for kids, what does it tell you about maybe a silver lining about education systems in our country?
Yeah, well, I'm tempted to quote me and Bobby McGee, freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. If you're Mississippi or Louisiana, who are, two of the current kind of it states in terms of literacy, they've been, at or near the bottom for a very, very long time. So, I mean, the good news is it does give you the kind of permission structure to be a little bit more, not exactly top down, but prescriptive,
sure.
Of reading instruction. And then there's that ceiling effect, right? If you're starting at the bottom, you can, the gains, look more robust more quickly.
Sure.
But and I'm more familiar with Louisiana than Mississippi, having spent some time down there. But Louisiana, to me, is probably the best model that I can think of in terms of, not being top down, but under their previous supervisor, John White, they made some, I think, very good, smart bets, which is to say, well, look, we're a local control state. We're not going to tell you what you have to do, but we're going to sweeten the pot for you. One person down there famously said, we make the easy choice, the best choice, the easy choice. So what they did, and stop me if you know all this, I won't bore you with this, they did a system driven by teachers,
right?
Where they had a certain set of criteria. This is what a tier 1 curriculum looks like. This is what a tier 2 curriculum looks like. This is a tier 3. You can't teach that here. So they basically did like an ed report sort of ranking. And they created incentive structures with professional development, coaching, etc., to incentivize local districts to adopt these so-called tier 1 curricula, and it seems to have worked. Again, it's not like they went from being the bottom to number 1, but in terms of, you alluded to the RAND work before, in terms of teachers understanding their standards, understanding their curriculum. Louisiana teachers look really good, because they're unless they sing from the same hymnal, but you get the idea. The incentive structures exist for them to pick a good curriculum, build their PD around it, teach it well with fidelity, even up to and including the assessments. they were talking about making some of the like if you think about a math test, there's no mystery as to what's on a fifth grade math test.
Right.
In a reading test, it's a random walk in the woods. But if you knew the content, then you have an incentive to teach. So,
and every teacher is a teacher of reading.
Every teacher is a teacher of reading. That is such a lie.
It is. It's true. I disagree with that, Robbie.
I disagree with Mr. Dodd because I think every teacher is a teacher of reading, but not for the reasons that we say.
Right.
In other words, if you view reading comprehension, keep invoking Hirsch here, as driven by your background knowledge, well, every teacher contributes to that store of background knowledge, even the gym teacher, for example. So if you don't know if that reading passage on the test is going to be about, the Vikings, the American West, stickball, etc., there's no such thing as wasted information. It's all the mill, and it all builds world and word knowledge.
All right, let me rephrase. Not every teacher teaches kids how to read. The nuts and bolts of reading.
But it all contributes. It's all grist for the mill.
So I guess the interesting thing to me here is that I'm taking away from what you're saying, Robert, is as much as I would like to argue on certain fronts on this, and then I will argue against myself, which I'm known to do as well.
Don't just stay out of your way.
I'm an arguer. I saw a guy at Hopkins. I can't remember his name when I was getting my doctorate a few years ago. He was really good, and he did a lot of work on the implementation of research-based practices in schools. And
it had to be Bob Slavin, who just passed away the other day.
It wasn't Slavin. No, it wasn't Slavin. He was a guest lecturer, and Slavin, man, he was a giant.
Nope.
Rest in peace. But basically what he said, and teachers don't like to hear this, is not a lot of data out there, not a lot of research that supports the idea that a lot of teacher autonomy in the classroom is the way to go.
You think I'm going to disagree with?
No, I know you're going to. I'm arguing against myself, so you're going to agree with me, right? So
okay, yeah.
But so I guess that raises the question, and it's an important question for teachers, for educators. What is the sweet spot of autonomy for teachers in classrooms when it comes to things like reading? And I don't know if we've ever figured that out. And it's an important question. I'd be curious as we finish up what you think of that.
This is a big, fat, grapefruit-sized fastball over the heart of the plate. Because this is a setup, right? Like that this winds me up. Because it really does. Look, I've already betrayed my affection for Hirsch, but that made me kind of a curriculum fetishist. And maybe the thing that I wrote some years ago that has resonated the most, like it shows up on syllabi and whatnot year after year in various places for reasons good or for ill, was a piece I wrote, and I think it had the title like "How We Make Teaching Too Hard for Mere Mortals," and it was about this idea. Like, think about this, like the demands we put on teacher time. Because I made a joke before, but it was actually true that staff developer who told me that I was the best person to know what every kid in the class needed. In other words, I was the person who was going to figure out what each kid was interested in, find reading materials for them, develop a curriculum tailored to this interest. With what time?
Yeah.
There was another RAND study some years ago that showed that literally almost every, like 99% of teachers in America cite materials that they either created or found curated.
Absolutely.
As driving the majority of their teaching time. Now look, maybe that stuff is fantastic. Okay, maybe there are 3.7 million Mozarts out there who are all creating different bespoke lesson plans on how to add and subtract unlike fractions.
Or maybe you're just spending a week on Halloween and it's a waste of time.
Apple Week.
About this, okay? And actually, I just wrote a book a few years ago about Success Academy in New York City, a high-achieving charter school network, and I think they've kind of got this right. The time that you're spending on Google, on Pinterest, on Teachers Pay Teachers, looking for material or creating it with stuff you get at the dollar store,
right,
is time that you are not spending studying student work, building relationships with kids and family, giving feedback I think carefully going over student writing, studying student work, planning to teach the lesson, doing your so-called intellectual preparation, heck, building your own store of knowledge, so you can be a more effective instructor.
Right.
I don't want to be dismissive and say anybody can write a lesson plan, but come on, nobody else can do that other stuff. So, I mean, if there's any hill I really am willing to die on, it's that one, that I'd like to see the culture of education change, so that we really ask teachers to focus on their maximum lever or their maximum leverage, which is that one-on-one react or interaction they can have with student, the feedback, etc. And this is where curriculum comes in, because you can't just hand them anything.
Right.
If you start with a good quality curriculum and you get expert at teaching it, then you're going to have the bandwidth to really contribute that value add and all those other dimensions that you literally are the only person who can do that.
Well said, Robert Pondiscio. So tell our listeners what you're doing now, where they can find your latest work. What do you have in the hopper?
Thanks. Boy, I'm looking forward to getting back into school. So I'm not hard to find. I post a lot on social media, on Facebook and Twitter, and whatever I'm writing. So my DMs are open, as they say on Twitter.
As the kids say.
Kids say, slide into my DMs, whatever that means.
This is a family show, Robert. Come on.
Anything that I write is going to show up there, and it's R Pondiscio at Twitter. So that's kind of for good or for ill where stuff shows up.
You working on a book? Is there going to be a book coming? Come on, it's time to write another book.
I wrote a book a little while ago. It's called How the Other Half Learns, about Success Academy.
Okay.
And now that schools are starting to reopen, I mean, I'm the one freak in the policy world who actually likes being on the road and in schools.
Right.
And that all came to a grinding halt last March. So hopefully this fall, I'll be back on the road and back in schools, and I'm sure stories will emerge as we emerge from the pandemic. But maybe I'll come visit you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say we'll have to get you down to the DMV, because we know you spend some time there. Well, once again, Robert Pondiscio, it's been great to have you on the show, senior fellow at the Fordham Institute. We're going to get you back on the show once things hopefully get back to normal next year. We'd love to get you back on.
Anytime. Enjoy.
All right. Thanks, Robert. Talk to you soon. Welcome back to Ed's Not Dead. I'm Robbie Dodd. I'm still joined by my co-hosts, Mr. C.H. Siddons and Mr. Peter Crable. Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Ed's Not Dead Media, a podcast media company that curates. I do believe Mr. Pondiscio used the word curate in one of his answers in that interview. Didn't he? Yes. I was a little appalled. Curates high quality audio stories across a variety of genres.
Who wrote that copy?
God,
some
Lord,
clown.
it pains me every time whoever that sponsor is. By the way, if you'd like to sponsor Ed's Not Dead, you can contact Casey Siddons. Robert was a great guest, don't you think, fellas?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
Good conversation.
He was great. He is a good talker, Mr. Pondiscio.
Yeah,
knows his stuff. I vote that he could be our. He seems like a friend of the pod. We could get him back on.
I think so. Yeah,
he could be our David Brooks.
Yeah, he could be our. Oh, Mr. Cable, that is genius.
David Brooks and Mark Shields.
I think you should, Casey, when you tweet about him on the show, I think you should say Ed's Not Dead's David Brooks, Robert Pondiscio. Do that. He'll get a kick out of that, or he'll be totally.
He's like, I hate him.
Or he won't talk to us ever again. Either way,
only one way to find out.
Anyway, thanks to Robert Pondiscio for coming on the show. All right, fellas, we are back. We are wrapping things up. This was I neglected to share with the audience that this is the draft episode of Ed's Not Dead. Our show booker scheduled recording on the night of the 2021 NFL draft.
Who watches the draft?
God forbid.
Why do we even have to watch the draft? It's conjured up by the NFL to make it seem like it's a big deal. It's not a big
exactly.
deal.
It's
Just read about it the next day.
It's brilliant. It is one of the most brilliant pieces of marketing ever.
Yeah, and you're sucked right into it.
Exactly.
They sell us hope, and I just buy it every time. Don't you, Mr. Kraves?
No, I don't.
The
I
perpetual
stopped watching the
Washington.
draft like 15 years ago.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, I'm with Casey on this one.
I'll always love the
The
draft.
perpetual Washington football fan club.
Oh, okay.
It's going to be a great year. I think things are looking up.
Adios,
Things are
baby.
looking up.
A dear friend of yours and I were talking about lamenting that you had scheduled recording the pod on the night of the draft, and I think he made mention of that you're a Packers fan and that you could name one single player on the Packers.
Literally one. Literally one.
Who's about to be traded to the Broncos.
The Jim Patterson?
The Jim Patterson.
Who are you talking to?
No, I was talking to your friend Mr. Miller.
Oh, yeah. I can only list one person on the team. This is true. I have to be a fan for conversation's sake.
One T. I just had like a moment of kind of my heart fluttered when you mentioned one T. It's been so long.
Should I give him a call?
Not right now,
Okay,
but we could bring that shtick back.
You know he's
right?
not going to answer, right?
I know, and he's stopped kind of the group texts. He's still alive.
He's still writing. Right? He's writing probably more than he did when he was full time.
He's sleeping in his lazy boy.
Drinking his. What's his drink? What's Jim's drink again?
Oh, I don't know.
He has a mixed drink that he likes a lot.
Probably a Manhattan.
We got to get him on the pod at
Someday.
sometime. We could make it. Would be funny.
They would.
All right, it's that time of the show where we are doing stock up, stock down. Ready, boys?
Ready.
All right. So this is how stock up, stock down works. I'm going to read the stop that. I'm going to read the point to you, and you've got to each of you have to give me stock up or stock down on it. Okay.
You got it.
All right. This might be a rather tepid stock up, stock down list. I might have to throw some
curveballs.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Here we go. End of year school celebrations. Stock up, stock down.
Oh man,
Mr. Krabs, you're first.
I'm gonna go with stock up.
Oh, that's a shocker.
Yes. I think
does that include like graduations and that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I think there's going to be some proms, and I think there's going to be some in-person graduations, and I think if you had asked a month ago, I would have said stock down, but I think it's trending upward at this point.
All right, end of year celebration, stock up, stock down, Mr. Siddons.
I'd say stock down. I think folks are still too nervous. I think there will still be parties and celebrations, but I think folks are still too trepidatious about joining in any big celebrations.
All right. Stock up, stock down, Mr. Siddons. One of your favorite times of the year, in-person parent conferences. Next year, stock up, stock down.
I say stock down. I think it's going to be Zoom parent conferences.
Oh, that's depressing.
Yeah, I think there will be in-person conferences that will take place maybe during the day for specific people, specific students. But I think parents as well will opt to do the Zoom conference.
All right, Mr. Krabs.
I think you're going to notice a pattern here. Stock up.
Whoa!
Oh, he's glass half full.
I'm very bullish, bearish, whatever the good one is.
I never know the difference.
I'm not a stock market guy.
Why can't they have two different animals? Like two,
I think it's bullish.
Yes.
Sure.
A bull market.
Yes. Anyway, I think that by next October, November, not all. I think Zoom will be an option, but most conferences will be in person.
All right. Okay. Ready?
Well, can I put out a hot take on that one?
Yeah.
Yes.
I hate to put cold water on everything.
He thinks we're going to be closed.
I think we're going to be closed.
Nah.
I think schools are going to be shut down in some capacity in the fall.
He is insane.
What are you talking about? Where did that come from?
Just telling you.
Are you? Is there a new variant I don't know about?
I think between the variants and the fact that not everybody's getting vaccinated, and the fact that there's just going to be outbreaks, we're going to continue the dance. I'm telling you. Listen, this is the day.
That's a hot take.
Listen,
I like it.
This is the day, April 29th, that you heard it here first, that there's gonna be a dance.
Okay. From Mr. Epidemiologist over there. Dr. Siddons. Okay, stock up, stock down. The 4-day in-person school week.
Oh, Lord. We talked about that.
Say it again.
No, and let me specify. The current 4-day in-person school week. Stock up, stock down. Stock up.
I hate it.
Stock up in my mind. It is a fabulous.
I'm with
terrible.
you.
Yeah, but I do not see it sticking around, unfortunately.
Okay. So it's future stock down.
Yeah,
It'll be.
I think that there will be school systems across the country that will perpetuate the thing that they were trying to do before the pandemic, which was to save money. They went to 4-day weeks. I think there will be a lot more of that from red states.
I could do a little bit more money saving.
All right, Mr. Siddons, stock up, stock down. The importance of summer school.
Oh man, I think I've said this before. I think this is a major stock up, not only with summer school, but maybe the shift towards all year schooling.
Oh God! Can you be any more predictable?
Why?
Because snow days, 4-day weeks, summer school, year-round schooling. Okay, he just turned his video off.
He's hiding now.
He's
Screw you guys.
I'm sorry. Finish. Go ahead. What does summer school have to do with year-round schooling?
Because I think it perpetuates the idea that learning happens or should be happening on a more consistent basis. So the summer slide that happens for students of color and students in poverty is much higher than other student groups. So I think the fact that if we bring in the idea that summer school should not just be an optional thing, but rather something that happens for every student, I think it's going to be better for every kid.
That was a very, very serious stock up take.
You were trying to break me, but I wasn't.
You were that, and I pulled out like the heavy artillery, and it didn't work. Mr. Krabs, this is just for you.
Yes.
And I completely forgot the stock up, stock down. That I was going to ask. Since you're Mr. Tech Guy, one-to-one devices for students across all grade levels next year.
That's going to be a big stock up.
Okay.
Yes. Devices are here and here to stay and are going to, and I don't know nationwide, like how far down to the lower grades they've gone, but I think it's just a matter of time before you hear the stories on the news about the kindergartners with the Chromebooks or the kindergartners with the laptops or the iPads or whatever. So I think this is probably going to be the next big movement, is a device for every student in the country.
More screen time.
Yep.
All right. We've got 2 more. You're going to get one more yourself, and then we're going to end with both of you going. Mr. Siddons, stock up, stock down. Standalone virtual academies or schools as a function of school systems next year?
I would say major stock up. I think a lot of school systems are planning these virtual academies across the country because even I think obviously most school districts will want a bulk of their students to come back. I think there's a big case to be made for students who maybe were homeschooled previously or home hospital that would benefit from this, students who are immunocompromised who would benefit from this. And then I think there's the other bucket of kids who this Zoom teaching has actually been very beneficial for them.
It's worked for them.
Yeah. Not many. I don't think not, but a lot.
Okay. Stock up for virtual academies. All right. Lastly.
Hold on. Let me answer that one.
Okay, that wasn't yours, but go ahead.
Come on, I want to disagree. So I think, compared to zero, yes, stock up. But I think that a lot of school districts may theoretically want to be able to do this, but I think it's not plausible for smaller school districts. So I think I don't think any non-urban school districts or large suburban school districts are going to do it. So I think you take all of them off the map. And then I think I wonder the economics of it. So schools certainly do have a large influx of money now from the federal government, but I do wonder that if school systems are thinking about doing it once the kind of the rubber hits the road and they're forced to make a decision, they're like, is this something that we really want to offer? I think it's going to end up being not that many school systems.
Yeah, I think the jury's out on. I think there's a lot of things that we don't know about staffing, how it impacts federal funding for how many students you have from small districts. Is it going to come from county or states? But that definitely brings up some good points.
All right. Thank you that was your first stock down of the sesh.
That's right.
Just because he wants to be opposite of me.
All right. This one is near and dear to our hearts. Stock up, stock down. Masks in schools, on campuses next fall. Mr. Krabs.
I'm going to say stock down.
Whoa.
That's a
Whoa.
That's
I'm
major. He's stepping out.
I'm thinking nationwide that more school districts will not have mask mandates than will have mask mandates. And that's why I say
stock down.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I think they should, but I think that taken on the whole, there's going to be fewer schools with mandates.
So I somewhat agree. That's a good point.
You got to give me your stock up, stock down.
I would say stock up because I think there will be, as I said earlier, a variant or some other way that's going to push us to close schools or go hybrid or something like that. I also think there are going to be a lot of students who will be coming to school with masks, regardless of the district's expectation. There will be a sizable amount of students whose parents want them to, or that they feel they need to have a mask on in school.
My 17-year-old's getting vaccinated tomorrow.
Wow.
So,
Well.
Yep. All right. That was stock up, stock down. Thank you, fellas. Great job.
Cue the music.
Crable was the stock up optimist. He was the bull market guy. Mr. Sids, you were a little bit down tonight.
I was bearish.
You're a little bearish.
The bubble's got to pop.
All right. So, as always, Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Ed's Not Dead Media, a podcast media company that curates high-quality audio stories across a variety of genres. One of our Twitter people will be tweeting things about this show at Ed's Not Dead PC. Check out the website, edsnotdead.com. And we're, again, excited to announce our partnership with Wise Education. We are going to be a press partner with Wise in some of their upcoming events. And we're going to be talking more about learning ecosystems in the weeks and episodes ahead. Right, fellas?
You got it.
Yeah, that's
All
right.
All right. Any final words for our listeners?
No, I'm just excited to get to the draft, really. Just watch the draft.
I know. I'm literally.
Casey, I'm going to come over. We'll eat some wangs.
I'm so excited. I got some wings. They're all flats. I'm so excited to see where Doug Flutie goes.
You know, I think Crable, the funny thing about Crable is he says he doesn't watch it, but he's been on his phone multiple times during the show.
Yeah, you don't have to watch it. You look at it.
Watching.
I know, but you like the draft, so you lie.
Yeah, I like the information.
Okay,
Yeah.
There you go.
But I will not sit in front of the TV and watch it.
No, I don't. Well, I will do that, but I'm more of a TV generation guy. Okay, I have something to leave you with.
Okay.
Do you want to know what 17-year-olds are watching? Do you have any interest in that?
Yeah,
obviously.
Okay.
Hold on. I was thinking if I could even have the slightest guess.
There is a show right now that I'd put up there with Star Wars, Game of Thrones, the Marvel Universe. It is called Attack on Titan. It's based on it's now considered the most famous, popular, well-regarded anime show of all time.
Wow.
It's in its 4th season. I'm 3 seasons in with my dear 17-year-old son. It is incredible.
Really?
It's based on a very popular Japanese manga called Attack by the same name, Attack on Titan. Do yourself a favor and watch episode 1 of Attack on Titan, and you will be hooked.
All right.
Done.
It is a fabulous show. It will blow your mind. The story.
That's Netflix?
No, I think it's Hulu.
Okay.
Yep. Check it out. I think it's Hulu. I might misspeak. I don't really. Johnny does the play. Johnny
It's one of the just.
I don't really turn the TV on.
You hit the button and it streams.
My only role is I change the input. He does the PlayStation. Find the streaming service. Okay, I don't do that part. Hard. There's so many.
I pay the bills. Darn it.
Pay the bills. Anyway, Attack on Titan. Check it out. I guarantee you there are listeners of our show that have adolescents that are watching Attack on Titan.
I'm Googling it right now.
You will dig it. All right. To our listeners, thank you as always. For Peter, Casey, we always appreciate you tuning on to Ed's Not Dead. Make sure you spread the word about the show. And we will be back. Thanks again to Robert Pondicio. He was a great guest, right, fellas?
That's right.
Senior fellow at the Fordham Institute. And for Casey and Peter, we'll talk to you soon. See you, fellas.
Bye.